Andrew Neil is here at midday with the Sunday Politics, but now it's the big questions on BBC One with Nikki Campbell, live from Cambridge.
Welcome to The Big Questions. We're in Cambridge at the Purse School. I'm Nikki Campbell. Right, Christianity, or the lack of it, has hit the headlines. Well, nearly every day this week. At the Vatican, Baroness Vasi attacked militant secularism. The Queen weighed in. She defended the Church of England's role in national life. And on the radio, Richard Dawkins appealed to God. Our first big question: is Britain a Christian country? Professor Dawkins says we overestimate the number of Christians in Britain and give the faith too much influence in public life. There is still a huge gap between the number of people who need a life-saving organ transplant and the number of organ donations each year. 3 people a day die on the waiting list. So, the British Medical Association is asking for a debate about previously contentious, even illegal methods of increasing the supply of organs. Our second big question: should it be easier to harvest organs for transplant? Sue Burton's son's organs saved or improved the lives of at least 6 people, but she thinks the new proposals for more active intervention are concerning. Welcome everybody to The Big Questions. Morning. Well, back in 2001, when the last published census was taken, 71% of us declared ourselves to be Christians, yet we know the churches are pretty empty on Sunday mornings. A new survey published this week by the Richard Dawkins Foundation found that the majority who call themselves Christian do not actually practice the faith in any meaningful sense. Is Britain a Christian country? And Richard, your foundation, it was an Ipsos Mori poll, and it polled people who put Christian on the census. But what was interesting about it is to a greater or lesser extent, whether it be sort of evangelical or all the way through to vague belief, 78% said that they believed in God. That's quite high, isn't it?
The poll that we commissioned was done by Mori, which, as you know, is a very respectable organisation, and so it should be attributed to Mori rather than to us. The first thing that the poll showed was that the number of people who call themselves Christian has dropped from 72%, I think it was, in the 2001 census, to 54% now, and the margin of error might be plus or minus 2 when the final census figures comes out. So that's already a dramatic drop in the number of people who call themselves Christian. What was more interesting in a way was when we looked further at what those 54%, remember we now wiped out all the people who don't call themselves Christian at all. These are the census Christians, we call them the census Christians. When we look at them, even they are not, in many cases, really Christian in the sense that most of the Christians here would, for example, recognize, I suspect. And of course they're absolutely free to call themselves Christian if they wish. Totally free country, you can label yourself anything you like. What worried us, and what still worries us, is that if you label yourself Christian, then the numerical strength that you add to the Christian figure may then be used by a much narrower constituency of Christian, who will then argue, oh well, the country is so and so many % Christian, therefore we need bishops in the House of Lords, and so on. So I want to dispel a misunderstanding, which is that we're not telling Christians you are or are not a true Christian. It's up to you whether you're a true Christian. But beware of using the ammunition of the percentage number of Christians, even though it's now dropped from 72 to 54. Beware of using that figure as ammunition for pushing through really strong, narrowly defined Christian values when most of the people, or a large majority of the people who tick themselves Christian, actually don't support those Christian measures.
But if they say they're Christian in some sense, whether it be, and it's a broad church, isn't it, Richard?
It's a very broad church, that's the point.
I know, I understand what you're saying, but if they say whether it be evangelical or vague you know, Christians. And it's not what we have in this country. We have a kind of a gentle Christianity. I mean, it's not a theocracy. It's not is it a danger to our...
That's the precise point that we're trying to make, that if you boldly ask people on the census, are you Christian, then you embrace this broad church of people who say, oh, well, I feel I'm a good person, I better tick the Christian box. Well, that's insulting to Muslims and Jews, for a start.
So how is that informing policy in a detrimental and dangerous way?
It forms policy because time and again politicians after the last census have justified Christian policies, Christian-inspired policies, and things like the 26 reserved seats for bishops in the House of Lords by saying, oh, well, the 2001 census showed that 72% of the country is Christian. We must respect them. Of course we must respect their right to call themselves Christian, but why not ask them whether they support bishops in the House of Lords? And they don't.
Or the resurrection, or the virgin birth, and all...
Yes.
Yeah. OK. Well, Cole Morton, I mean, quite a lot of... There have been strong words this week during this debate. And Baroness Varzi last week referring to, this week, militant secularists, saying they're deeply intolerant, using words like, you know, Stalinist and totalitarian. You've called Richard, in your book, the Ayatollah of atheism. Not sure if you were aware of that, Richard. Why is the slightest challenge, the slightest, not even a challenge, but a question?
Research, indeed.
Research seen as militant.
No, I'm absolutely right. I will let Baroness Varzi fight in the way that she does, and that's fine. In relation to what I said in the book, that was in reaction to a specific moment that I've seen Professor Dawkins behave in a way that seems to me to be very similar to the way that I've seen religious fundamentalists perform in meetings and in the way they conduct themselves in public. And you know, perhaps that was over the top in the book, but actually the point is that I'm sorry, Professor, I think you're a brilliant scientist, but I think you let yourself down by behaving like a fundamentalist, and I find that distressing.
When was the last time I threw a bomb?
Well, I'll get to you in a minute, Richard. He asked, when was the last time you threw a bomb?
Well,
rather than an intellectual bomb.
But can we talk about the survey? Your introduction said that these people did not practice Christianity in a meaningful way. It was meaningful enough for them to put down on the form that they were Christian. Now, on the basis of a poll that I think is 1,000 people, Professor Dawkins is dismissing as largely irrelevant, and those are the words that he used, the belief system of, by his statistics, more than half the population. Now, what else the poll shows is that we are still a nation, whether or not we're a post-Christian, post-imperialist nation, whether we're throwing off the kind of Christianity that dictated us for 500 years and finding a new way forward in a multi-faith world, we're still a country that very firmly and emphatically has some kind of engagement and fascination with God and with spirituality.
Wasn't that exactly what I said?
No.
You feel an engagement with Christianity, so you tick the Christian box. Absolutely fine. I feel a good person, so I'm going to tick the Christian box. But when we went on to say, when you are faced with a moral dilemma, do you turn to your religion for moral guidance? Only 10% said yes. So the whole point is that the people who tick the Christian box entirely welcome to tick the Christian box. Of course they are. I'm not denying them that right. But don't use those figures to justify much narrower Christian policies when you come to make government decisions. That's all we're saying.
More of which in a minute, Christina. But I want you to address this tag of militancy, you know, and because there's a little bit of a backlash towards you, and there's Cole's nothing to do with it, but there's an article in the Telegraph this morning. They've done a kind of who do you think you are on you, and they found out that one of your great whatever ancestors was a slave owner, and they've gone, aha.
You will be amazed at what's been going on this week. One after another. I mean, this one in the Telegraph is just the latest. I really feel we're rattling their cages. When you feel the need, when a Telegraph reporter feels the need to retaliate by going back 300 years to an ancestor of mine, I think he was my great-great-great-great-grandfather, who owned slaves in Jamaica. I mean, how desperate can you get if instead of listening to the argument, you say, oh, his great-great-great-great-great-grandfather owned slaves?
To the best of my knowledge, this is neither a smear tactic nor a retaliation for anything. It was a story that somebody found out and they printed it in the paper. I'm not involved in that story, and I can't comment on it, but to the best of my knowledge, there is no sense of a smear tactic or retaliation.
No, but I have to admit, working for the Telegraph as I do...
the Telegraph on trial.
No. We were rather amused by the fact that Professor Dawkins has often talked about how religion enslaves humanity. And it was interesting to see that he comes from a family that used to enslave people too.
But that was what prompted the article then?
Well, no, I don't think that's what prompted it.
Yes.
I'm saying that it was amusing when we discovered.
But Christina, we're all more related to each other in this room than he is to that ancestor.
Richard's my brother, actually.
But if you what's interesting about, you know, this is a political debate as well as a religious one, and Richard's made that point very powerfully. These figures are being used in a political way.
Is this a Christian country, Jonathan?
Well, I'll come back to that just one second to make a point about the slavery issue, because Bishop of Rochester, you know, spoken out in defence of the Christian country by saying, look, we abolished the slave trade, forgetting, of course, that bishops were, one of the agencies of the Church of England was branding slaves. Bishops were supporting the commercial trade. And I think what we've got is a situation where neither side in this debate is being realistic about the history, accepting the mistakes of the past, recognising that religion had a good part to play, but also a terrible part to play, and so did secularism as well.
Is this a Christian country?
This country has never been a Christian country. I don't think it is now.
Jonathan,
in terms of, well, let's take our definition controversially as the values of Jesus Christ. Why don't we?
And you're a Christian.
Is this country really endorsing the values of Jesus Christ? Come on.
What would it look like were it to endorse the values of Jesus Christ?
Oh, well, we might forgive our enemies a little bit more. We might have a more equal society. We might not encourage a capitalist system which, you know, makes people compete against each other and work more competitively.
Christina, O'Donnell.
I think it's a Christian country, and it should stay a Christian country. Why
What
is
do
it
you
Christian?
mean by that?
By Christian country, I mean that everything from the language we use every day comes from the Bible. The church we walk past on our street is a part of the Christian culture. Charity, all kinds of institutions, from hospitals to orphanages to schools, were founded by churches. So our culture is definitely a Christian culture.
That's
now,
religious, Christina, but not necessarily Christian. Let's take, you know,
that's part of our identity.
You know, the rich man in his castle, the poor man at his gate, the Lord God made them high and lowly, each to his estate. It was an endorsement of medieval feudalism. It was an endorsement of, you know, keeping inequality as it is.
But that's not
Christian, that's religious.
But that's not God-given. Yes, that was written by a Victorian lady, and it was an expression of her values.
It was an expression of religious values, but I would say not Christian values. And we need to make a huge distinction between the two, because the two are not the same.
Jonathan, I think that, as I said, we have a culture that is Christian, and it comes in. What completely confounded Richard Dawkins was that he thought we were textbook Christians. You know, that we knew which was the first book in the Bible. We knew what the first 5 books of the Old Testament were called. No, that's not the kind of Christians we are. We are everyday Christians. It informs our every life, and it means that we do believe in charity, and we do believe in helping others, and we do believe in turning the other cheek much, much more than if we were a totally secularist culture.
Richard?
I didn't think anything. I asked Ipsos Mori to find out. Research is not preconception.
Yeah, Andrew.
I mean, actually,
actually,
that's not what the research shows at all. It doesn't show that people live their lives as if Christianity is the cultural wallpaper. It shows quite the opposite. It shows that although they tick Christian as a sort of cultural box, and the most commonly given reason in the survey was because their parents were religious or because they were Christians, so it's a sort of heritage attachment. Actually, Christianity forms very little of the common sense of their lives.
Well, can I put it to David? Colin, a second. I think this is important.
Most people, for example...
Can I put the David Cameron quote to you, because then you can run with this, if I may. The Prime Minister, he said recently, he described Britain just that, a Christian country. And he said, the Bible has helped give Britain a sense of values that has made Britain what it is today. What do you think of that statement?
Well, I think that Christianity has contributed to the formation of culture in this country, but it's not the only factor that has contributed. It depends when you start the story. Of course, if you start the story when this country became Christian, Christianity lies at the beginning. If you started earlier, you're with the Romans and Greeks. If you start it later, you're with the secular Enlightenment. So it's artificial and arbitrary to some extent where you start the story. Lots of influences have shaped